The story of the land that became the United States began with a quiet earth, rivers that moved slowly, forests that swayed in the wind, plains that stretched endlessly, and skies that shifted from gray to blue in the most ordinary ways. People lived here long before anyone called it a country, walking across the land in patterns dictated by seasons and the availability of food, noticing when berries were ripe and when rivers flooded, moving in ways that left little trace, carrying few possessions, stopping where water was plentiful and soil allowed roots to grow, and then moving again when they had taken what they could take. Life was long and slow, and the rhythms of hunting, gathering, planting, and harvesting created days that blended into one another. They made tools from stone and wood, noticed the changes in the moon, learned which plants could heal and which could harm, and passed stories from one generation to another, stories that were long, repetitive, and full of details about the movements of animals, the flow of rivers, the growth of plants, and the seasons of the year. Europeans arrived eventually, although they did not arrive all at once, and they brought their own long and slow ways of doing things, first exploring, then claiming, then building small settlements, often very slowly, noticing when the weather changed, when the soil could grow crops, when rivers could be crossed, when fish and game were plentiful, and when the winters were harsh and long. Conflicts arose slowly, not as sudden bursts of drama, but as incremental adjustments, complaints, misunderstandings, and long negotiations that sometimes failed, sometimes succeeded, and sometimes produced agreements that lasted only a little while. Colonies grew slowly, as settlers cleared forests inch by inch, plowed the land slowly, built homes that took many months to construct, planted crops that would take months to grow, and waited for the rains and the sun, for the frost and the heat, for the conditions that allowed life to continue, and sometimes to thrive, although often barely. Daily life consisted of repetitive tasks, fetching water from streams, chopping wood, maintaining shelters, tending to animals, repairing fences, planting seeds, harvesting grains, cooking meals, cleaning tools, sewing and mending clothes, observing the sun and the moon, and noticing day after day how the seasons changed in ways both subtle and obvious. Trade happened slowly, with goods carried from one place to another by foot, by horse, by boat, and sometimes by wagon, each journey taking days or weeks depending on weather, river currents, terrain, and the stamina of humans and animals. Communities communicated with letters that traveled slowly, sometimes lost, sometimes delayed, sometimes taking weeks to reach the recipient. Political ideas spread slowly, first as whispers, then as discussions in homes and public squares, then as printed pamphlets, all carried and debated in the same slow, meticulous way that life otherwise moved. Tensions built gradually, as colonies noticed how governance from distant lands affected their daily routines. Taxes were levied in ways that were not sudden, but accrued over time. Laws were interpreted, challenged, and ignored. Disputes simmered, and people argued about the most mundane details of representation, commerce, and property, long before any rebellion or conflict took shape. The revolutionary period was not instant. It was a long accumulation of complaints, petitions, boycotts, assemblies, and minor skirmishes that escalated slowly, almost imperceptibly, until a decision to separate was reached after years of discussion and minor acts of resistance. Wars themselves were slow, with long marches, long waiting periods, slow supply chains, slow communication, long encampments, slow drills, and repetitive routines that were more about enduring time than about sudden bursts of heroism. After independence, the new nation grew slowly, expanding westward by slow increments, negotiating treaties, moving settlers, surveying land, creating towns that grew one house at a time, clearing forests, building roads, and establishing institutions that required years to function in even the most minimal way. Political life was slow, filled with long speeches, slow debates, slow elections, slow changes in policy, and incremental reforms. Economies grew slowly as farms tilled soil inch by inch, cities built structures slowly, trade networks expanded gradually. Industries started small and grew at their own pace, and people waited, often impatiently, for improvements in transport, technology, or opportunity. Slavery existed as a slow, constant, oppressive background to the nation's growth, embedded in daily routines, reinforced through long-standing laws, customs, and social structures, resisted in quiet ways by some and violently enforced by others, creating tension that accumulated slowly over decades until it could no longer be ignored. Conflicts over states, territories, rights, and resources emerged not as sudden explosions, but as long disputes, negotiations, compromises, and incremental changes, punctuated by wars that themselves moved slowly, with long campaigns, drawn-out sieges, repetitive marches, and the careful administration of armies and supplies. The 19th century saw gradual inventions and industrial growth, trains that moved slowly at first, factories that grew slowly, communication systems that improved but still moved at human or mechanical speeds, cities expanding incrementally, people migrating slowly within the nation in search of land, work, and opportunity, and politics continued in a slow rhythm, with parties forming, reform movements gaining traction over years, social debates lingering, and laws changing in small steps rather than sudden revolutions. Life for ordinary people consisted of long routines: farming, working in mills, building homes, attending school when possible, tending families, shopping in small increments, traveling slowly to visit neighbors or towns, and watching the slow evolution of their communities over years and decades. The Civil War, though violent, involved long campaigns, long marches, long encampments, repetitive routines of drilling, foraging, waiting, and enduring weather, disease, and exhaustion, with battles separated by long periods of inactivity, planning, and incremental maneuvering. Reconstruction and the post-war period were slow, with gradual social change, slow recovery, extended debates over rights and governance, the painstaking rebuilding of towns and economies, and the incremental integration of formerly enslaved people into the nation, often resisted and obstructed in ways that slowed progress to a near crawl. The late 19th and early 20th centuries brought industrialization, migration, and urban growth at a gradual pace. Railroads expanded slowly, factories were built incrementally, cities added one building at a time, and immigrants arrived in waves that stretched over decades, each family adapting slowly to new routines, new work, and new surroundings. The political system adjusted slowly, with laws passed gradually, reform movements gaining traction in fits and starts, and national debates over tariffs, labor, immigration, and civil rights dragging on for years without quick resolution. Wars abroad involved long preparations, long travel times, slow supply chains, extended deployments, and repetitive drills for soldiers and civilians alike, enduring waiting, minor skirmishes, and incremental changes to daily life that ultimately added up to larger historical outcomes over extended periods. The Great Depression was slow, grinding, and monotonous,
with economic decline creeping steadily across farms, towns, and cities. People adjusting slowly to scarcity, rationing, unemployment, and uncertainty, often relying on routines, community, and small innovations to survive day by day. Recovery under government programs and industrial mobilization occurred incrementally, with employment growing gradually, infrastructure being built piece by piece, and people adapting slowly to new opportunities and regulations. World War II involved long logistical efforts, long industrial production schedules, extended training periods, and repetitive routines for soldiers, with combat punctuated by long periods of waiting, movement, and incremental advancement, rather than constant action. The post-war period saw slow suburban growth,